This video will demonstrate the new features of the version 4 proofreader for Gibbscam. If you're new to the proofreader, you should check out the link on the screen, which will take you to the video for the first release of the proofreader. The first video will cover how to install and set up the proofreader, as well as cover its basic usage. The latest version 4 has a number of additions which go beyond the proofreading stage and takes you right through to the posted code. In order to launch the macro, you need to have a part program opened. In this folder here, I have a single file for a lathe part. At the moment this is the only file in the folder, but that's going to change as you start to use the macro. I'll pull this folder back and show you what's happening as I use the macro and try to explain to you what all the files are for. So right here I'm going to open that file. And now I'll be able to open the macro. So this essentially looks the same as it did before, where you can have your selected profiles here, and you can create new profiles, copy the profiles, and make all the edits to it. I'm going to open up this quickly just to get to the next screen here, and you can see now there are a number of more options on this list. Before it only came as far as turning. Now we have header builder, code inserter, setup sheets, and posting settings. And I'm going to go through one by one and explain what all these mean and how to set it all up. Now before I go over the new features, I want to quickly go over some of the new settings that have been added. Under General, there are now settings for how the cutter compensation method is currently set up for both mill and lathe. Depending on how you normally would use the software, you can warn if it's not set up that way. Under tooling now we have a setting for lathe threading tools. Whether you set up from the tip or the edge, you can warn if it's not set up the correct way. Under drilling now we have a new setting here for warning if the Z retract has been set below your entry clearance plane for drilling. The next page here, if your exit clearance plane for drilling is below the master clearance plane that's on your the document tile here, you can warn for that. Also we have maximum feed rates for drilling for mill tools and lathe tools. You can set a value here, and if you exceed that value, you'll get a warning for that. Under milling, these two settings here were in the earlier version 3. But they weren't quite behaving properly. That's been fixed, so they do work properly now. They were warning for not only roughing on size but also the contour operation. So now it's just the roughing. And for rough milling and contour, there are some warnings now. If your depth of cuts are too low or too high, you can set minimum and maximum limits for those. In case you're for a particular machine you're taking too big of a cut, you could have that warning pop up. And also feed rate control here. If you're feeding too fast in roughing or contouring, you can set limits up to throw up warnings for those. Turning. Depth of cut warnings here for that as well, if the roughing is too large or too shallow. Warning if the rapid step is used or not used. And that is it for all the new settings. The next thing I want to cover is the settings at the very bottom of the list here, posting settings. In posting settings, you can set up all of your default posting settings that you would normally use for this particular profile. And because this is profile based, you can set different posting settings up for different profiles. So it's not really tied to one MDD or machine type. You can set up as many different ones as you want. So right here you would select which post processor you want to use for this particular profile, what options how you want it posted out, number of parts, full retract, exit clearance plane. You can also choose which editor that you'd like to use. You can select Notepad or WordPad right from the list, or you can set up a custom one. I use Notepad Plus for a number of reasons, which you'll see shortly when I actually start posting code. I'll kind of explain why Notepad Plus is a really great editor. And what you can also do here too is specify what file extension you want to have on the outputted posted code. And again, this is going to be based on your profile, so you could have a number of different extensions if that's useful to you. It's completely up to you how you want to do it. So if I return out of here, the next thing I want to do is I want to try and post this out. This part already has all of its operations programmed. I'm going to go render it now to check that everything is okay. So there's the completed part. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the proofreader, and we'll do a check to make sure that all the operations are okay. So now we actually have a warning now. We have a tooling warning here. If I view the report, it will tell me that tool number 7 has a threading tool problem. It is actually that new check that was put in for checking where the offset was taken. So if I close this off, I can see sure enough it is set in the center, and I had my settings set to check to make sure that it's on the edge. So I'm going to change that, and I will run the proofreader again, and now it all and everything checks out. So now I can continue process G code now that I know that everything's okay. If for whatever reason you have a check that comes up with a warning, and but you know that that warning is not really applicable, it's not really going to affect the code, then there's also a button to process the G code anyways. Both of these buttons will get you to this page here. So this here is a dialog for actually producing the posted code. I haven't gone over header builder, code inserter, or the setup sheets yet, but I'll just go right to the posting to get started. So all of these will come in. If this is the first time you've run this with this file, these will all be the defaults from your profile page. Once you process the code, you will get a setup file that gets put in with your VNC file, and that setup file is going to save all of the settings that you override. These are basically overrides, and you can override whatever your default settings are, and this will follow the VNC file because it's going to be inserted into a setup file with all of these settings. So if I look at the folder now that has our part in there, now I have a log file, and that is basically the results from the proofreading. It's created a log file for that. So now we have a second file in there. So I'm not going to produce a header yet. I'm just going to process just as is. So if I hit the process button, I'll just minimize this a little bit. So I've actually produced a setup sheet. If we go back and run that again, you'll see that in setup sheet, I had that enabled, so that will produce a setup sheet. So that's why I have both a setup sheet and the actual posted code here. The setup sheet has the actual part name, the list of all the tools in this file, all of the operations, the time for each operation, and then an estimated total time at the bottom. You don't have to use setup sheets. You can disable it if you don't want to, if you're using Reporter or something else. And here's the posted code. Okay, so that's without any of these other options, just posted code, and you did sort of see the setup sheet, how that works. Now with Header Builder, what Header Builder does is it will allow you to create, I'll hit the create button here, and that will allow you to create header text at the beginning, the man-readable text for telling the operator how to set the job up. So in this case, I could start typing in some information. Just a few things like that. I'm going to stop it right there. So I'll close off this. And now I have an indication now that I do have a header that exists for this. If I process now, my setup sheet will now have the header information here at the top. Also, it will be inserted into the CNC program at the top of the list. You can control where this text gets placed and the type of comments you use depending on what kind of machine you have. I'm going to go back into those settings real quick here. Under Header Builder settings, we have this here is the insertion line from the top down. How many it counts how many lines down before inserting the inserter in the header. You have the ability also to select the editor that you want to use for when using Header Builder. This is the style of comments for when it inserts the header into your program. Most common is the brackets, like in all Fanuc style machines. If you have a Siemens machine, or I believe Heidenhain, will use the semicolon in front. We also have the ability to do a custom, so you can put in whatever you want at the beginning of your comment and at the end of the comment if you need it, and it will put those at the beginning and the ending of every line of commented code. Optionally, you can insert a tool list and an operation summary as defaults as well. This can also be overridden, and I'm going to do that right now actually. So I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to say insert a tool list. You can optionally insert every tool that's in your tool list on the sidebar, or you can do just the tools that are that were used, which is what I'm going to use. Now if I process, setup sheet will look the same, but now I have a list of tools, and the tools list will be inserted right after the header. If I can take that a step further now, and I'm going to tell it to insert an operation summary. It's a very basic summary, but what it will do, again, the setup sheets don't get affected, but it will tell the operator basically what operation number, what tool is being used, and it's followed by the operation comment. Like you can see here, there were no comments for these operations because I was using a separate operation to mill each flat, so I only commented the first one. So this sort of gives the operator a rough idea of what that's going to do if he needs to take a look at this and jump down to a certain operation, he can use it as a guide to navigate the program. So that's how that works. Now I'm going to go back into Header Builder and just expand on that a little bit. There are a couple other options here. We have loading a header from a file or copying a header from another VNC. Loading a header from a file is basically gives you the ability to open up some other text file, let's say. Like I have this file here. If I click that and then I hit the edit button, that has made this entire program the header. Obviously we don't want that, but I can now just go and sort of strip off the stuff I don't want and get rid of these comments because they're going to get put in automatically for me. So this is a way that you could maybe take something that you already have, if it's similar, if you can use the same header, or you want to use it and expand on it, and now that will become your header. So if I go in here now, you can see that was placed in the setup sheet, and that is now my new header. The other option there we had was to load it from another VNC, and what that's going to do, it's going to actually open up the setup file from another posted program and extract the header text out of that setup file and place it in this setup file. It saves you a lot of work. So now let's say if I go to another folder here, I have this part. If I open up that setup file, now if I go and hit the edit button, I can see that all that information has been pulled across. It's actually the same header that I just from that same file, but it works without having to cut away all the stuff I don't want. It's just all ready to go. And the setup sheet, I'll go back to that now. Setup sheet, you can enable it and disable it right here. The other option it will do here is that you can list all the tools, or just the tools that were used in the operations, which is kind of nice so you don't clutter up your setup sheet. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there's a lot of extra area here. Possibly in future versions I'm thinking of maybe trying to add some functionality where we can, instead of using the setup sheets you've seen so far, maybe try and get some of this data pulled across into Reporter somehow. So we have possible future changes here as far as the setup sheets go. So the last thing I want to cover is how the code inserter works. So if I go to the settings page, into code inserter, you can see we have it divided into 3 sections: pre-code insertion, post-code insertion, and target code insertion. What this basically means now, pre-code insertion, if I select that, I have a file here that I can select, and 5 lines down from the top in this box here, what will happen is when the code is posted out, 5 lines down from the top, this collection of codes here contained in this file will be inserted at the top of the program. That can be anything up to you on what you want to do with that. It could be for lathes, like I'm going to demonstrate in a minute here. It would be a bar stop routine. It could be a bar loader. It could be anything to do with on a milling machine, something to do with moving over to a loading position. Completely up to you on how you want to do it. Post-code insertion works very similar, except it's going to be the lines are counted up from the bottom, and it'll insert the code at the end of your program. It could again be for part load, unload, or some sort of pallet shuttle coding, or whatever you want to do with it. Target code insertion, a little bit different. Again, you have a file which is a collection of codes that you want to insert, but you have a target that it's going to look for. It's going to scan the posted code, your NC program, and it's going to look for this target. It could be a plain text word like this is here, or it could be an M code or whatever. And when it finds this code, you have some options. It's either going to replace it with this text, it's going to insert this text before or insert after the target. And it can do that every time, every instance, or only on the first instance. It's completely up to you and how you want to set that up. So I'm going to use a couple of programs here to try and demonstrate these things working. But before I do that, I'm going to back up. And this profile I have here is my standard profile. I'm going to make I don't want to disturb this profile. I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to hit copy, and I'm going to make a new profile called bar stop. So now with the bar stop profile active, I will go back into my settings for code inserter, and I'll go to my pre-code insertion settings, and I'm going to call up a program called bar stop. And as you can see, it's a simple routine, indexing to turret position 1, which would be the bar stop. It could be a piece of brass or aluminum, plastic, whatever. And you're going to index to that. The truck will open, and it's going to move down in front of the bar, just where the last part had been parted off, and it's going to stop. Wait for the operator to pull the material up to the bar stop, chuck the spindle. Cycle start, it's going to pull back 1/4 of an inch and go home, and cancel that tool. So that's the bar stop bit of code that we want to insert 5 lines down from the top. So I'll hit return, save this profile, bar stop. So now if I ever write a program and I want to use a bar stop, I can use this profile, or I can choose not to, and it would just be a normal NC program with no bar stop. So I'll use my bar stop, and I'll run the checks. Now, one thing to point out now is that the settings page are all the defaults settings, and everything on this dialog are your overrides. You can override anything that you have in your settings page. And in this case, because we've already processed a few times, everything that's on this dialog had been pulled back from the setup file that we've already have for this program. So if I go into code inserter, you can see that it is not active. If this was a new program, we were starting from the beginning, then it would be. So I'm going to select pre-code insertion. I'm going to select that bar stop one more time because this is an existing program. I'm just going to make sure that is off. Everything looks good here. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these operation summary and the tool list off, just to make it a little bit easier to spot the fact that this code is being inserted. So I hit process, and we can see here's the bar stop right here at the beginning of the program. So if we go back now and run these checks again, but this time we'll turn this off, you'll see that the bar load routine, or the bar stop routine, has been removed. It's back to just a regular CNC program again. Nothing inserted. So now we're going to take this just a step further and demonstrate how the targeted insertion can be used in this, as well as pre-code insertion. If I select and have it search for an M30, I'll make that capital, M30, and I want to replace that with this loop code, and essentially that's just an M99. So what's going to happen is that M30 is going to be replaced with an M99, and it doesn't really matter if I do it every instance or first instance, because there's only one M30 in the program anyways. And what this is going to do, it's by taking that M30 out and putting an M99 in its place, that program will just loop endlessly. So we'll save the profile. Now I'll run this again, but remember, these settings have all come from my setup file. These are the overrides. The settings that I just changed in the settings page are my defaults for a new program. Because this is not a new program, I need to go set these up. I shouldn't really have to do the pre-code again, but I'm doing it anyways. I'm just going to select that file and set my target again. And then I will run this. And so now we see we have our bar stop inserted at the beginning. At the very end, that M30 has been replaced with an M99. If I go back, run it again, and I only remove the target insertion, process it. I still have my bar load at the beginning, but at the end it's an M30. No, did not get replaced. Essentially that's how the code inserter works. There is some plans now to expand code inserter in particular when it comes to the target insertion. Currently you can only do this for one particular target, where I think it would be quite a benefit to expand on this and maybe give you the ability to give you, say, a number of targets, maybe 10 targets that you could have from a drop-down list, and have a number of different files associated with those targets. So in your operations list, you could put a literal bit of code in your utility boxes, and depending on what you type in there, it could be picking out these different targeted replacements, and you could be getting all kinds of things happening inside your program automatically. So that's basically how the code inserter works. So now if we have a look what's going on in our folder, we can see we have a lot more files. We have the original VNC file. This file here with this SHT is our setup sheet. We have a separate file now. If I ever need to open that up and print out a setup sheet without having to go into everything again, I can just double click it and I have my setup sheet. This file here, this is a SUF, that's a setup file, and that contains all of the overrides. It will store your header text. So whenever this VNC is opened in the future, the macro is going to take a look to see if it can find this setup file, and if it can, then all of those overrides, all of your header text will be pulled up immediately. And which is kind of nice, because then if you ever have to go in and make a little adjustment to the your program, you don't have to cut and copy out and paste in any kind of header text from other programs. It's all ready to go. As soon as you hit process, it gets reinserted into your updated program. It really saves a lot of time if you generate a lot of programs in a day. If you write really large programs and you're only producing one program maybe in a day or a couple of days, then it's really not much of a benefit, but it is when you create a lot of programs. This one here is my actual part program that, or the NC program that's going to go into the machine. And then again, we still have our log file. Now what I'm hoping is that in the future, when the macro language is further developed by Gibbscam, if they implement a text box control, then these results, I don't have to create a file for them. I can just have them appear on the macro inside a window, and that would eliminate the need for me having to generate this program or this file here. But currently that's the way I have to do it. We have a separate file just for that. Now before I wrap this up, I want to go over something really quickly here, and that has to do with this Notepad Plus. I kind of pointed out that it's a really handy editor. A lot of neat things about it. It's very customizable. You can get a number of programs up in these tabs here, side by side. Oops, get that back again. So if I open up another program, like say, go back and maybe open up this guy here. What's nice about this, you can flip back between the two programs. If I right click this, I can have this move over to the other view. You can get two programs side by side, so you can work on this one, you can work on this one. A lot of times what I will do is I will take a program that was run in the shop and load it back and bring it up side by side with the one I have in the office, and what I can do is I can kind of line them up, and then I can lock the scroll bars together. Then I can go through and I can compare to see what has changed. If I zip down the file and see, okay, these are no longer synchronized, what happened, I can just go back and find out when somebody changed something. It's kind of a nice way of being able to spot changes in the file. So I'll unsynchronize that. The other thing it's kind of neat is that you can place these little markers by clicking in the side area here. You can place these little markers just to, like bookmarks almost. And then if you hit the F2 button, you can just flip back and forth between those markers. It's not only for CNC programming, but it's even for like coding macros. It's a great tool for that sort of thing. Another thing I really like is when you go into search. Let's say if I wanted to search for an M30, I can tell it to search all the open documents, and you can see I found an M30 in this one, and I found an M30 in this one. And another really handy feature I find when coding macro programs is if I have debug statements or things, I can go and make sure that I've weeded them all out by doing a search through all open documents. Nice way to sort of clean things up. Anyways, so that's my 2 cents about Notepad+. It's a freeware download. Also, I didn't mention that it's got a spell checker too, so that's kind of nice too, because then when you're doing your header text, you catch a lot of typos and make sure you're putting proper spelling in all your header comments. Now, as I wrap things up here, I just want to mention that the macro is not yet posted up on the forum yet. There are a couple of things I'm just kind of polishing off. One of the behavioral things that will be different on the version that's actually posted has to do with code inserter, and what is going to happen is whenever the code inserter inserts any sort of code into the program, whether it be targeted or whatever one you choose, there will be a warning message that pops up right after the code is posted. And I'm going to do that just so, because whether you miss the fact that you posted a header or any kind of comments, it's not really detrimental. But sometimes I could foresee that if you have unexpectedly inserted code that you weren't aware of, it could be a bad thing. So any kind of code insertion that happens to actual executed code is going to come with a warning. So that's going to be the only real difference when it's released. Another thing I'd like to give the thanks to the coders at Gibbscam for implementing a lot of macro parameters that needed to be done in order to implement the checks that people were asking for in the forum. So Gibbscam was good to help me out with that and get a lot of those parameters added to the macro language. And I think I've got them all in there that were asked for. So if there's any other sort of checks that you can think of in the future, you can just post them on the forum, and if I can get them done, I'll see if I can add them into the next version. Like I said, there will be a version 5 that will be having expanded code inserter functionality as far as the targeted goes. I'm going to start to look at maybe implementing some sort of reporter functionality, and like I said, any any checks that people can think of that can be implemented, I'll see what I can do.